You're listening to the A Minute to Midnight show. My name's Tony, and in this episode we have the return for part 2 of a series with Nathan Leal, and the information that Nathan brings out in the second part is absolutely amazing. And the show will be longer than normal, but it's well worth listening all the way through. And also there are none of the audio issues that were apparent in part 1. The quality of the audio in part 2 is excellent. Welcome back to the A Minute to Midnight show, Nathan Leal.
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Great. Well, okay, so a big question that I have, and I'm sure a lot of other people have the same kind of question in mind that are our listeners, particularly our regulars. Was Donald Trump chosen by the Illuminati, or is he just a loose cannon?
That is the million-dollar question, Tony, and I have been examining that question, trying to find out. Over the past year and a half of the campaign, I have spent literally hundreds and hundreds of hours poring over documents, listening to audios, reading books, to try to get down to the bottom of this, to find out the truth. I know that you can go to YouTube and people will speculate and say that he is, but they're not showing concrete proof. So I have taken it upon myself to try to figure that out. Now, if he is in the Illuminati, then we can expect that the plan will continue, and it's just different actors. You know, all the world's a stage, as Shakespeare said. If he is not, then it's also going to be interesting because, you know, Adolf Hitler was a loose cannon, and look what he did. Of course, people looking behind the scenes would say, well, he took loans from the rich folks, but Donald Trump he's an interesting character. He's very, very interesting, and I have wondered, Tony, I don't want to speculate, I don't want to guess incorrectly, but I want to be a wise student of prophecy, and I want to understand the end times. You know, in scriptures, we're challenged to be wise. In the previous episode where I was on as a guest, we talked about the 10 virgins, and 5 of them were foolish and 5 of them were wise. And that's a key word, something to think about, wise. And that setting occurred in the end times right before the bride showed up. And one of the most important things that I've always noticed about that parable is it said at the midnight cry, the announcement was made that the groom was coming. So that should tell all of us that it's going to be dark. And if it's going to be dark, the thing that they had going for them was that they had their lamps, but also an interesting word, wise. Now, when we look at the book of Daniel, chapter 12, Daniel was perplexed over the visions that he saw, but he was told in the last chapter of Daniel, Daniel, seal up the book. You're going to rest with your fathers, but time will continue. And then it jumps to the very, very end, and it says, the wicked will not understand, but the wise will understand. That is said in Daniel, talking about our time. If we are truly in the end times, the wicked people are not going to understand, but only the wise will. Now, let's qualify it, Tony. If some people are wondering, how do you define a wise Christian? What defines it? Well, one of the things, I know what it's not. A wise Christian is not a know-it-all. A wise Christian is someone who studies and examines and looks, and he watches and he prays and he seeks, but he doesn't just sit still. And I have proposed over the years that the second coming is going to mirror the first coming. And when I say that, I'm talking about the attitude of the church and the way that it plays out when Messiah shows up is going to match. Now, watch this. When Jesus came in the first advent, when he was born, at that time, he was born in the country of the children of Israel. We agree to that, right? So, and the children of Israel were God's people. So the same application to that in our time would be the children of God, the grafted branch, the church. So in the first Advent, when Jesus was born, I'm pretty sure that there were very popular seminars and conventions that were on the circuit, and they'd go around to different synagogues, and this expert of Bible prophecy showed up at the synagogue, and he's Rabbi so-and-so. Everybody come, get your tickets. And he told everybody, he explained and taught them how Messiah was going to show up. There were people who were prophecy students and teaching the people how it was going to play out when a Messiah came. And the reason we know this is because several times during the ministry of Jesus, people would ask him, Rabbi, teacher, master, is it time? Are you going to overthrow them? Are you going to take over? Are you going to rescue us? They had an idea of how Messiah was going to rescue them. And it was wrong. We know that now. But the prophecy teachers taught them wrong. So now let's look at the day that Jesus was born. When he was born, how many people in Israel actually knew that he was born?
Yeah. Well,
how many? 0. Now, the shepherds were told, but the angels had to tell them. If the angels didn't tell the shepherds, it would have pretty much just been Mary and Joseph, and that was it. Now, yes, there was a prophetess who would pray in the temple, and she was told that you get to see the Messiah before you die. So she knew he was coming, but she didn't know when. So actually, the timing, no one knew. And then, now watch this, Tony. The only ones who knew that Messiah had been born were here's the word, wise men.
That's a good point.
Right. So Jesus tells us the wise virgins had their oil. And then in the book of Daniel, it said the wise will understand, but the wicked will not. So in the first advent of Jesus, only the wise ones knew that Jesus was born. That was it. Now, let's move fast forward to the second advent. When Jesus comes again in the second coming, we're going to see the same thing happen. And this is how it's going to play out. The signs that a lot of people are looking for because they've been taught wrong or they're expecting the wrong ones will never happen. Instead, the signs that are going to take place are the ones that were written in the Bible that people never saw. They never figured it out. They never interpreted it. In other words, I believe that God is going to throw a prophetic curveball in the end times just like he did the first time. And it's only the wise ones who will understand. Now, when we look at the Tim LaHaye books, the series, Left Behind, those things sold millions of copies. Even non-Christians read them. So wicked people read them. And they read the narrative of how it was going to play out according to Tim LaHaye. So the people that read those books who were wicked, let's say they get saved a few years later, or a week later, or a month later, and in their mind, they're still thinking, hey, I remember that book I read, so I need to be looking for this prophecy. So they're looking for it. And then they get online, and other people are also looking for it. But is that the one that's going to happen? So in the same way, this is the rule, Tony. The more people that are expecting it, there's a good chance that there are wicked people in that group also. So that means, that nullifies that it's going to happen. Because Daniel says the wicked will not understand, but the wise will. So that means that many of the prophetic markers and things that we are looking for, because we've been told by the experts, may not happen the way we're expecting. Now, I'm not saying they won't, but I'm saying they may not. So that's why I regularly say this, Tony, and I tell people, I try to encourage people with this, to try your best not to be dogmatic and to insist that it's only going to play out this way. It is wiser to place several options on the table as you acquire them, and then you have more to look for.
I completely agree with that. In fact, I had a a couple of people with rapture timing today on opposing points of view, and they were both adamant that their way was absolutely correct and it's scriptural. One of them was pre-trib and the other one's post-trib, and they're both as adamant as each other that they're correct and the other one is wrong. And I'm thinking, can't you guys just actually go, well, wait a minute, maybe I haven't got this quite right, and keep looking and, and not being so dogmatic that you can't even look at other possibilities. And so, yeah, I can fully relate to what you're saying because I had that experience today. I see it coming from both directions. In fact, we try and avoid the whole rapture discussion now pretty much at A Minute to Midnight for this very reason, that all it does is polarize people and get people angry with each other. So I just really, think, no, I don't even want to go there mostly nowadays.
Amen. That's right. So now getting to the topic that you brought up today, Donald Trump. Instead of being adamant, because I've already heard people say it, popular voices out there. Now, for example, Tom Horn was on Jim Baker, and he was sharing an account of how some rabbis were saying that they believe Donald Trump's the Messiah. So he was explaining how a sect of rabbis in Israel believed this, that he's the guy. But then he went on to say, but of course we know he's not. And of course we know he's not the false Messiah. We know he's not the Antichrist. But anyway, they're thinking that he is. So see, how do you process that in fairness? In reality, what we should be saying is, if there are a sect of rabbis who are saying that Donald Trump is the Messiah, we need to place that on the table and consider, just leave it there and see if it incubates, see what comes out of it. So that's what I have been doing. Donald Trump is not a normal person. His temperament is off the charts. His profile is off the charts, and I'm sure the psychoanalyst guys and the psychologist people, they've already been trying to figure him out. I have seen some reports where they say he suffers from this, he has this, he's hyper, OCD, or some of the psychologists are saying that he's a narcissist, he suffers from narcissistic disorder. Whatever those earthly man terms are, I don't think there can be any doubt. There can be no doubt that he's a different individual, and he always has been. So as I look at him, see, before he was the president, he was, in my eyes, a celebrity. He was a public figure, but in reality, he was a cartoon in my eyes because of just the things that he did. He just has done crazy things.
The thing, though, that a lot of people in the Christian circles are saying, yes, but that was in the past. Now Donald Trump's got saved and he's a new baby Christian, and we got to, treat him differently than we did before.
I do not want to say he's not saved, but that Jesus did tell us that we can look at the fruit and you will know them by their fruit. And sadly, Christians are not following that admonition because Jesus said it to us. It was an instruction. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't elective. It wasn't a suggestion or an opinion. He told us to examine the fruit. Unfortunately, the evangelical leaders are not looking at the fruit. And when I look at the fruit, when I watch him, when I see him gather in prayer circles and get prayed for at luncheons and breakfasts, and they lay hands on him and pray for him, most of the time, Tony, he doesn't close his eyes. And it's very easy to confirm this. Go to YouTube and look at them yourself. He just stands there. A true Christian, whether he's a baby or not, wants to isolate himself when he's praying. Now, okay, Nathan, the Bible says watch and pray. Really? You're going to be a stickler about that? I'm just saying I am examining the fruit. But I don't want to sidetrack on that. I want to get down to the actual things that we have before us. Now, you brought up the question about Donald Trump, and you asked, is he in the Illuminati, or is he a Freemason, or is he a part of a secret order, which could span many different kinds of orders. There are secret orders that are never going to make it to the front page. They're not going to be on the news. They don't announce what they're doing. The elite individuals who are a part of the very highest wealth of the planet, they are involved in orders that have a very small membership count. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, that's what Adam Weishaupt, original Illuminati founder, basically said, that their true purpose will always be concealed. I'm paraphrasing here. That their true purpose will never be known, basically because it's concealed. I can't remember the exact quote. I could find it.
Now, amen, exactly. And over the years, there have been some detectives out there for God who, the Columbos and the Sherlock Holmes that are trying to figure this out. There are individuals who have tried to dig and interview people and look at documents to try to figure it out, white papers, admissions, testimonies, to figure it out. And it's a puzzle. And, you can go online and type that in. Who is the elite? Who are they, quote unquote? And a lot of results will come up. There's a lot of opinions. Some say that there's 13 bloodlines of the world, and then they go up to the top, and some say that the queen is at the very top of all of them, and there's a lot of opinions about it. The Rothschilds are involved, and then you have the Committee of 300, the Club of Rome, the Bilderberg meeting. You have all of that, and then the tiers go down with the CFR and the Trilateral Commission. There are Western ones, but there are also Eastern ones, and there's a lot of excitement, and it's fun to study this stuff, but is all of it true? Is it, or is it not? And that's the mystery of this. That's why they conceal it, to keep everybody confused. But one of the things that is accurate is that there is a global conspiracy to control the world, because the Bible tells us that there is. 10 kings will give their authority to the beast.
The actual quote from Weishaupt, I now have it in front of me, is, "The great strength of our order lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in its own name, but always covered by another name and another occupation." And of course, Weishaupt was the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, along with Mayer Amschel, Rothschild, and 3 others.
Thank you, Tony. Exactly. So the names are concealed, or they're veiled, or they're counterfeited, or they're facades. There's a lot of red herrings and misdirection. One hand is hiding while the other is gaining attention. So when I have examined the rise of Donald Trump, I have looked. We have to actually look at his past. We have to look at his beginnings. We have to look at his family history. We have to look at where he got his education. Who did he rub shoulders with? What steps has he taken in his rise to wealth? What are the things he's been involved? See, we have to ask these questions if we want to get down to it. To just accept the testimony of a evangelical preacher, Jerry Falwell Jr. says that Donald Trump is the greatest thing, and during the campaign, he promoted. Let me say this, Tony. I don't mean to be rude, but he repeated fables about Donald Trump that weren't true. For example, there's a urban legend, and this started with Henry Ford, about the rich guy in his limousine, and it breaks down. He has a flat tire, or it quits running, and a commoner comes forth, a peasant, a poor person, an average middle-class person, happens upon him, changes the flat, helps him, and then his house gets paid off a few days later. And that urban legend has been attributed to Henry Ford, as well as Hollywood stars, famous actors. And during the campaign, it was attributed to Donald Trump, that he was on the New Jersey Turnpike. He broke down, and a gentleman helped him, and then Donald Trump paid off his house. It was the same story. And there is no proof of this, but during the campaign, Jerry Falwell said from their chapel that he did that. And then he went on Fox News and repeated the same story. And the only reference that we have that this is true was that Donald Trump said that he did it on one of his Apprentice episodes. So what is true and what is not? And then I started seeing it on Facebook. It was everywhere. See, he gives. Well, I'm not just going to take a Facebook meme post as truth. We have to get down to the facts. And I want to encourage the listeners out there, Tony, this is a sidebar, but be very careful about repeating or forwarding or spreading news reports or news stories from Facebook or that are emailed to you and it gets forwarded. Because, Tony, I've watched over and over well-meaning Christians repeat a story, forward a story, and then it turns out to be false. During the campaign, this was happening to an epidemic level. And it was embarrassing because the people that are doing it mean well, but then the stories turn out to be false. And the way that Donald Trump rose to power was by craftiness, was by deception. He was using the playbook that was originated from Combs, his attorney friend, his lawyer friend from the 70s and 80s, and Roger Stone and Paul Manafort. Roger Stone, for those who are familiar with him, is a political saboteur, and he excels in getting involved in campaigns and placing false stories, releasing false stories to the press that are not true to destroy the opposition and thereby allowing his candidate to succeed. And he did that successfully during the Trump campaign. For example, the story that came out that Ted Cruz's father, Rafael Cruz, helped Lee Harvey Oswald kill John F. Kennedy. That was a report that came out in the National Enquirer, but the source for the story to the National Enquirer was Roger Stone. And he based his conclusion on a photograph that was obtained from the JFK Library, the Memorial Museum Library. There's photographs of Lee Harvey Oswald, and there's one when he's handing out leaflets for communism, and there are people around him. It's very grainy. It's black and white. It's a 40-year-old photograph, or actually it's older than that. And he claims through his photographic analysis, he concluded that that person was Rafael Cruz. Therefore, he was involved. And that story went viral, and it hurt the Cruz campaign, and that played a role in him quitting. Also, another story that came out that Roger Stone planted was that Ted Cruz had affairs with 5 people. That was a Roger Stone story. Roger Stone also put out another report to destroy Marco Rubio, from when he was in college. And because Marco Rubio wears boots that need a zipper on the side, Stone crafted an entire narrative that Rubio is a closet homosexual, and you can tell from when he was in college. And he took certain events that Rubio did, and he created this narrative, and it destroyed Rubio. But that's the sort of craftiness that Roger Stone was good at, and that's what was used during the Trump campaign. You know Al Sharpton, the politician?
Yep.
He showed up on the radar. He showed up on the radar when he was recruited by Roger Stone. He was given $200,000 to add his name to the ticket to run as an opposition. He was hired by Roger Stone, and it looks like the money was sourced by Donald Trump to mess up the election, and that's what put him in the limelight of being a politician. But it was that sort of activity, which is kind of what we suspect occurred with Hillary's opponent. Okay, but let's get back to Donald Trump. So I've looked at his past, I've studied, and that's what a wise person does. So how do we find out if he's in the Illuminati? Well, I have been tackling several categories. I am going to be releasing in the days ahead an installment. And by the way, for the listeners that may not know, I am doing a regular series right now, producing a series. It's at my website, watchmanscry.com, called The Trump Chronicles. And in those, I am looking at the other side of the issue to offer balance to the free ride that the evangelicals are giving him. That's not balance. We need to look at the fruit. So I'm doing an installment, and I am tackling different categories of things. And in my upcoming installment, we're going to look at and we can probably do a show on this, Tony. I have dissected the coat of arms for Donald Trump. He has 2 of them, by the way.
The double-headed phoenix and one. Yeah, that's something I've looked at a little bit as well. Yeah, for sure. The other thing is you mentioned, I think in part 1, about how Donald Trump, when Trump Tower was built, recruited mafia, New York mafia. So what about that actual building in the Trump Tower and the history behind that? Have you got some information there for us?
Yes, thank you, Tony. And installment number 4 has just been released, and by the time the audience is hearing this, it will be on my website, watchmanscry.com. It's part 4 of the Trump Chronicles. And in this part, I was going to make part 4 about the coat of arms, but while I was researching the coat of arms, I came across this, and this had to take precedent because I believe it shows and reveals something that we need to at least consider. Now, as I am tackling these questions and issues, I'm treating them as if they were a court case. I present evidence, and then what needs to occur is, based on the evidence, I need to present enough to surpass reasonable doubt, just like a court case. I am trying my best, Tony, to use intellectual integrity and honesty through research and proof and citations. So as I was getting ready to release the coat of arms, I came across information on the Trump Tower, and it shocked me. I couldn't believe it. So what it did was it sent me on down another trail of crumbs in an entirely different direction, and that's what I want to talk about tonight. So your listeners can go to my website and actually follow along as we discuss this. It's part 4, and it's called the Trump Tower and Baal's Invocation. Now, the question that many people wonder is Donald Trump a Mason? Is he a 33 or 32, if any? And so far, we don't have the snapshot of him inside the lodge. But what we do have are the evidence, the exhibits of evidence. And I want to start with some of the evidence that most people have seen that have watched Donald Trump over the years. And it has to do with his hand gesture. I have noticed, Tony, and for the listeners that might have noticed this too, I placed several images in this article. Donald Trump regularly, and he seems to do it the majority of the time, does the upside down triangle with his fingers. He'll have the thumb pointing up and all his fingertips are touching and his thumb will be touching, but it's forming an inverted triangle. When he goes on talk shows, whether it's Jay Leno or any of the other guys, The Late Show, he's showing this hand gesture, and I have to wonder why. Is it subconscious? Is it a habit? Or is it something, are his arms stuck that way? I have a picture, Tony. Do you see him? You have him in front of you? Okay, scroll down to, okay. I have several pictures of him sitting at talk shows. He's on TV. And the second one, The Late Show, you see it's now here's what's odd to me. He is leaning over to listen to the guy interviewing him. He's leaning, his back is leaning, but his hands stay in that position. And to me, that's a weird posture because it's not normal. So I have to wonder if the gesture is something that he's doing on purpose. So let's ask the question. Let's write on the chalkboard the question, class. This is it, ladies and gentlemen. We're taking notes. We're trying to conclude something here. Is Donald J. Trump a Freemason or in a secret order of some sort? As we look at these pictures of him making the inverted triangle, that does raise suspicion because that hand gesture is what those in secret orders will use to illustrate the inverted triangle or the upside down pyramid. They will do that. Now, there were other images of people that were of pagans doing ceremonies who were doing the symbol, and I believe there's even one of Aleister Crowley doing one. Or the people from the Church of Satan, they'll do it. So I have to wonder, why is he doing it? So at this point, we can't say for sure he's doing it because he's in the Illuminati, but we have to place on the table that he is doing it. And why, we have to ask then the question, why is he doing it? And I often wondered this, Tony. I was wondering, okay, if he is in a secret order, the Freemasons, the Illuminati, I wonder if there's a sort of arrangement. And by the way, if your listeners might know this, maybe they've come out of this and they might have the answer, please email Tony. Tell him and he can share it, or email me at watchmanscry.com and let me know. But I've wondered, Tony, if individuals who are in the secret orders have to put in so many, you know how when you get in trouble with a judge, you got to put so many hours of community service here in America, in the States at least. And I wonder if a recruit or initiate who's moving up has to do that to show their loyalty. So, because see, some people, when they see him doing the gesture, they wonder if he's doing it just because he wants everyone to know that he is, or he's doing it because he loves it, or is he doing it because he has to? That's what I wonder. Also, I will say this, based on what many of us have uncovered, and a lot of your listeners are familiar with this, the very wealthiest people in the world participate in very dark rituals to achieve and maintain their wealth. For example, and there have been tales, people who have escaped from satanic mistreatment, people who have come out of Satanism have revealed and testified that they were used to breed, that's the term they use, breed children, and they were held prisoner at lavish resort type places, or places that are very wealthy, that are away from a population center, like a mansion in the middle of nowhere, and they're kept there. And part of the reason they stay is could be from brainwashing, and that's why they have to be deprogrammed, or they're actual prisoners. But they have testified that they have been breeders for babies, and then the babies are used in horrible sacrifices. And we know about the black mass, the Satanism black mass, when they say they simulate a human sacrifice, but we know that they actually do that. And then you have Halloween, you have May Day. So human sacrifice still takes place today. And the very wealthiest of the world, I'm not going to say they all do that, but they either attend real sacrificial rituals or mock ones. Now, recently,
Bohemian Grove would be a classic example of the mock one. Yep.
Exactly. The cremation of care, the effigy burning. Exactly. So they have an arrangement to maintain their wealth. They have to exchange something. Part of it is their loyalty, and part of it is their recruitment process. With the right people, but they have to, there's an exchange. It's not free. So if Donald J. Trump is in a secret order, I have wondered, is he doing this gesture as a part of his arrangement for wealth, as an arrangement for services, for gifts exchange, for favors to be done for him? So let's place that on the table. Is that why he does it? But as I was researching this, I then wondered, well, what does the upside down pyramid or triangle actually mean? See, a lot of people they'll write articles and talk about it and do shows and blogs and YouTubes about the Illuminati pyramid, and they talk about it. Look at this. The Super Bowl had the Illuminati pyramid, or the Olympic ceremony had it. But some people don't know what it means. What does it represent? So it's also important for us to look at the background of what they mean. And so I did that. So in my article, I purposely started to dig to reveal where it comes from. And Tony, the as I said, the trail of crumbs went to very disturbing places. But in that, I also came across more clues. Now, when we look at the upside down triangle and the inverted pyramid, it goes all the way back. Now, the Freemasons use it right now. They use, when you look at the, let me stop myself. We'll get to that in a moment. The Freemasons do use both the inverted triangle and the facing up, upside up triangle. They use both of them, and we'll get to that in a moment. But this goes all the way back to Babylon of the Old Testament, of the worship of the false gods of Baal, going all the way back when Satan brought the false worship. He tried to counterfeit the worship of God, and so he came up with creative means, creative characters and rules and rituals and fun rituals, and I'm going to explain that too, that humans would gravitate to. So he came up, he invented these religions in Babylon, and then when the children of Israel were set free from Egypt and they made it to the Promised Land, they were exposed to the evolution of the early Babylonian Baal worship. And that was taking place in Israel when they arrived in the Promised Land. And Baal worship, another description of Baal worship, is a cult of fertility, or a fertility cult. Now, what does that mean? You know, Tony, when I was a early Christian, and I've been a Christian 35 years, but I would hear the sermons about the children of Israel going off to idolatry and Baal worship, and the preachers that would tell us from the pulpits, those bad Israelites kept carving these statues and then praying to them. And I would think to myself, okay, if I'm on the porch and I get a piece of wood and I whittle, something that looks like a human, I'm not going to pray to it. Why would I want to pray to that? That's dumb. I thought that as a young Christian. And through the years, I kept hearing the same repeat of that. The children of Israel, they struggled with Baal worship. They liked to worship statues. And nothing, the rest of the narrative wasn't explained to the Christians. But over the past few years, archaeologists have actually discovered a lot of artifacts that come from back then, and also images of things that took place back then. And it turns out that Baal worship was a fertility cult. And what that means is a fertility cult is where sex is part of the ritual. There's an actual sexual event that takes place during their ritual. So when Baal worship took place, it turned into an orgy. And the elements and the components of Baal worship were the male and the female reproductive organs were worshipped. So in Baal worship, Baal is the male, and Baal means Lord. And they would build pillars, and most of your audience knows this. The pillars were phallic symbols to represent the male portion. And then they also had the Asheroth, which is the female, and that was represented in a tree. So the tree was life-giving, it was fertile, and in Baal worship, the setting was a grove of trees, and what they would do is they would plant certain trees in certain shapes, and then they would place poles that represented the male phallic symbol, and then they would also have an altar, and then they would do their prayers, and the high priest of Baal would then get to, because he's the high priest, have sex with one of the young virgins to bring fertility and blessing to the land for the next crop. And then after that, the fathers who wanted to have their crops blessed got to also take part, and then before you knew it, it was a big orgy. So now let me pause for a moment, Tony. Would that not appeal to human carnality?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it does today. Just look around.
It does. So, I can imagine, Daddy, what are we going to do today? Oh, son, we have to go to the fertility ritual. And it's a teenager. Can you imagine him saying, well, I don't want to go to church. That's boring. Can you imagine him saying that? Of course not. Now, over time, Baal worship evolved throughout the world. Baal and Asherah evolved into other deities, but they were basically the same thing. When you go to the Far East, when you go to India, when you go to Indochina and parts of Asia, they have all these temples that are fertility temples, and they actually have the temple prostitutes, and people will go in there for the same thing, to please the god, whatever his name is in that country, so that they can have their crops, and then they have to go through the drudgery of being with the temple prostitute. How horrible for the flesh for them, right? Well, that's just an excuse to fornicate. But that's the sort of thing that takes place worldwide. Even to this day, it takes place. But back then, we had the fertility cult of Baal, and the children of Israel were exposed to it. And so they saw the Asherah, which represents the lady, and there were idols that the Canaanites had and all the different ites that were around them. And they had illustrations of what Asherah looked like. And in the illustrations, archaeologists have taken rubbings. They've placed paper over rubbings for carvings on rock or in different burial sites. And they've done rubbings of Asherah, the fertility goddess. And in many of the images, her private area is an inverted triangle, her reproductive area. And I have the pictures here. They're rubbings of. They look like cartoons, so they're not crude. But this is to show the inverted triangle. And then when we look at Baal was represented in the pillars that represented the male organ. And then it evolved over time and over different cultures into the obelisk, which Washington Monument is one of those. We have that in St. Peter's courtyard, right? In the Vatican, an obelisk, which is a pillar of Baal. So that's what they encountered. Now, as mankind continued and modernized, Baal worship just got a new name. The names were changed as it arrived for the Grecian Empire. The names changed as it went to Rome. The names changed, and Asherah turned into Isis or some of those other deities that we see in mythology. Aphrodite and all those others. That the names are many, and some people they don't know this. They don't know that a lot of the mythological characters, Nordic mythology, Viking mythology, Roman, Grecian, as well as some of the Far Eastern mythologies, or early Germanic or Norse, all these mythologies have the same characters, but the names have been changed. But it's the same guys. The sun god changed. So we see this over and over. Now, let's move forward to the present, to Freemasonry. Freemasonry has taken the same elements of the fertility cult and renamed them, repackaged them, but it's the same thing. So as we move forward, now, one thing that I want to touch briefly is dualism. Now, dualism is, some of those New Agey pagan beliefs, if you read about them after you've read a whole page of the explanation, sometimes you might find yourself saying, what? That doesn't even make any sense. That's dumb. And dualism is one of those things that makes no sense because it's too easy to argue against, but this is what many New Agers, and in fact, most of all the non-Christian, in fact, let me say probably 100% of the non-Christian beliefs out there, and that includes pagan, New Age, Satanism, esoteric arts, Freemasonry, all of those. They all have the same elements, and the reason for that is because the source is the same. It's from Satan that goes back to Babylon. And dualism is part of their belief. And the reason they came up with this was to get rid of sin, to say that bad is not harmful to the human race. So here's what they did. They repackaged sin, and they came up with a clever scheme. And they said, well, in order for the universe to function normally and correctly, light and dark have to coexist and bounce off their energies off each other. They need each other. So God and Satan need each other. God could not be God if Satan wasn't around. Night cannot be night without day, and black can't be black without white. And then it starts getting into philosophical craziness. But this is what they believe, and they use this to bypass sin. So as a result, it turns into situational ethics where, well, if you need to use the bad to achieve the motive or the agenda, then it's okay because balance will occur anyway. The water will refill when you move it out. It'll come right back in. It's fine. And this thing is illustrated in Satanism. They have actually come up with it's one of their poster boys. It's called the Baphomet. Tony, you're familiar with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And I have a picture of the Baphomet in this article. And the Baphomet represents all of those non-Christian beliefs of dualism. And the Baphomet is pointing up and also pointing down. So it means as above, so below. So it has to rise. What we're doing must rise, but also it must go down. So we have to be moving in both directions at all times. Now, when we go back to Baal worship, the inverted triangle that represented the female points downward into the earth. And so when then you get into pagan rituals or witchcraft, the earth worship that goes on even to this day, and the earth worshipers, the pagans, the witches, and the druids, they believe that the earth that's Gaia is the earth, and that's where all the energy and the power comes from. So you have to get it from the earth downwards as well as upwards to the celestial heavens. So it's the same thing. They get it from up as well as down. So it's continually the same thing. Down is the female portion and up is the male portion. Now, dualism in Freemasonry is shown in symbols, even in their Masonic lodges. They will tile a floor with black and white tiles to illustrate dualism. And then when you look at the square and compass of Freemasonry, now, if you were to ask the average novice practicer of Freemason, even they don't always know, Tony, because they are told that the square and the compass, because they put a G in it, that represents God, the great architect. That's what they're told. And most of the public is told this also, but that's a lie. It's not true. And they purposely do this to offset the truth of what they really believe. They're always steering away as they are also revealing. In fact, let me read a quote from Albert Pike. This is what he said, and this comes from the book Morals and Dogma, page 104. He says, Masonry, like all the religions, all the mysteries, Hermeticism, and alchemy, conceals its secrets from all except the adepts and sages, or the elect. So those are the chosen ones that stick to it and move up in their offices of degrees, and then it's revealed to them. It goes on to say, and it uses false explanations and misinterpretations of its symbols to mislead those who deserve only to be misled. And Tony, there it is right there. You mentioned earlier, they conceal, and they...
Yeah, it's pretty much Albert Pike. Yeah. He basically is like the next level beyond Weishaupt's original thing, because we know that Pike was a successor of Weishaupt in the same organization, basically, and bringing all of Freemasonry and all secret societies under the Illuminati was their ultimate goal.
Exactly. So it's hidden in plain sight before all. So they do it on purpose. So when we look at the square and the compass, and for the listeners that are wondering, Nathan, what does this have to do with Donald Trump? I am establishing a foundation, and it's very important to get a hold of this, ladies and gentlemen, because then by understanding this, you may find yourself then having your eyes open to even more of the symbolism that's out there, because they try to conceal it, but we're exposing it. Do not participate in the deeds of darkness, but expose them. Bring it to the light. Amen, Tony? That's what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So regarding the square and the compass, I just want to read something because then we're going to move on and this is going to come together. A former 33-degree Mason, his name was James Shaw, explained to his Royal Arch Initiates, and that's one of the higher levels of Freemasonry, and he said the real meaning of these great lights is sexual. He admitted it. The square and the compass represents the female generative principle, the earth, and the baser sensual nature. It represents the female, which is passive, the earth, but the female. And the compass represents the male, which is active, the generative principle, the sun, the heavens, the higher, the spiritual nature. The compass arranged above the square symbolizes the male, sun, impregnating the passive female, the earth, with its life-producing rays. The true meanings then are twofold. The earthly human representations are of the man and his phallus, and the woman of her receptive, her female body parts. It says vagina. The cosmic meaning is that of the active sun, the deity, the sun god from above, imparting life into the passive earth, below, producing new life. So you have it pointing down into the earth, the life from above. Okay, now keep this in mind. Let's keep this in mind, Tony, and ladies and gentlemen, as you're listening, keep this in mind because it's going to come together. Now, as we move forward into the question of, is Donald Trump in the Illuminati? What we have so far is the inverted triangle that he does with his fingers. That's it. However, we just learned what it means. It's the female part of their belief system, of earth worship. The package, it's Baal worship. Now, I have Exhibit B is what I called it. During Donald Trump's campaign, several of his staff members were wearing and seen wearing a strange, odd-looking lapel pin. Tony, during the campaign, do you remember seeing this, or is this the first time you've noticed it?
No, it's the first time I'd seen it, actually.
Isn't that weird looking?
It sure is. Yep.
And ladies and gentlemen, the article has images. I have images of this pin. And the pin is an inverted triangle. And the present press secretary, I forgot his name.
Spicer?
He is Sean Spicer, yes. The present press secretary, Sean Spicer, during the campaign wore it. Corey Lewandowski wore it, and several others wore it. Now, the pin fits on the lapel where usually the politicians would place a little flag, and Donald Trump would always wear a United States flag on his lapel. Well, these staff members wore this pin, and the pin is purple and gold. Two colors. It's split right down the middle, purple and gold. And I looked at that thing, and during the campaign, I tried to figure it out, and not many people pursued it. The press didn't really get much traction. People were asking questions of, well, what does it mean? A few wondered about it. But then when a few media personalities started asking questions, the excuse that came out, the official story was the Secret Service gave them the lapel pins so they can know that they're part of Trump's team. That was the excuse. Now, Tony,
even if that
in the history of the Secret Service,
well, even if it were the truth, I mean, what? Even if that was the truth, why would they choose that particular symbol? I mean, it's...
Tony, you're exactly right. That adds another layer to the argument. Even if it was suggested, the Secret Service then asked the Trump campaign team, to give them something that they could use to signify, you guys need to be wearing something that lets us know. So why? Why did they do it? And then the reason I have a problem with that explanation, though, is because members of the team were also seen by themselves at TV stations where they went by themselves to be interviewed. And I have some of those images. I'm going to be adding those as well. But if that was to show that they are part of Trump's team, why would they do it if they're alone at a TV station? That doesn't really make sense. So this is what I was wondering, Tony. Again, I am acting as Columbo here, trying to be Sherlock Holmes, trying to investigate using investigative integrity, looking at the facts, asking questions, who, what, where, why, how. That's what we need to be doing. By the way, for those of you out there, ladies and gentlemen, that have your citizen blogs and your citizen journalists, please try to follow that rule, because one of the sad trends that I have noticed in the alternative right media, which includes us, all of us, is the tendency to put up stories and journalistic stories that have no citations, no proof, no backup, no sources. And that's not responsible. So that's what I'm doing here, though, Tony. I'm asking that question. If it was done because they were told to, Donald Trump decides everything. He micromanages. He knows what's going on. And we know he micromanages because he's micromanaging the country right now. He's calling up world leaders. He's bypassing the state office. He's bypassing military council. He's bypassing economic council, and he's just calling people up and doing his own foreign policy. So he does micromanage. So the question is, why did he have this pin? Well, as I was researching, I looked to the Freemasonry websites, and I was trying to study, okay, the pin is gold and purple. Does gold and purple signify anything to the Freemasons? So as I looked, I came across, and I learned this, by the way, depending on the office of the degree that an initiate to the Freemasonry craft is in, degree 1, 2, 3, as they move up, they will be given and issued an apron that shows what degree they are in, and the apron is in different colors. So there is a color scheme for every level of the degrees. Purple and gold are the colors that go along with Grandmaster. Now, this part, Tony, I consider a clue. I consider this potential evidence that needs to be visited. Gold and purple represent the Grandmaster. Now, what is the Grandmaster? The Grandmaster is the person who presides over a Masonic jurisdiction, and there are two ways to become a Grandmaster in the Freemasonry. One is by working their way up, holding the title and working their way up through the chain. And then the easier route is to be given an honorary degree, an honorary office of the Grandmaster. Now, while I was researching this, I then asked myself, well, okay, honorary, that would mean that they would take individuals who maybe they want to have favors from, or who are wealthy, or maybe they're a politician or a high-level member of government, including a president. Would a president be given an honorary office of Grandmaster? And lo and behold, as I was researching, Tony, it turns out that Roosevelt was given the honorary title, as well as Gerald Ford, Harry S. Truman. And so this is what I was then wondering. And if this turns out to be true, we will know in the future through evidence, possibly, or through maybe rumor, or it eventually will come out at some point. I am hopeful, at least, that it will. It may take a few years because it only came out recently that Winston Churchill was a secret. He'd never allowed people to know that he was in public, but it came out that he was a Mason, but it was in secret. So the honorary office is given to presidents. So this is what I wonder. Was Donald J. Trump given the honorary membership of Grandmaster during his campaign because he was running and they knew that he was going to be the president? And by the way, Tony, I believe that you have testimonies from individuals that were told years ago that he was going to be the president. Is that true?
Yeah, that's dead right. Joni Stahl was told that Trump was She told us a year ago that Trump had been chosen 2 years previously, so that'd be 3 years ago, to be the next president, and given the reasons why, which is, to be an aside here, when people are claiming that Mark Taylor said, foretold or prophesied that Trump would be president, therefore all these good things are going to have to happen because he was right about that. Well, we can turn around and say, well, actually, Joni Stahl was also came out saying that Donald Trump was going to be the president well in advance, but the reason is a totally different one than what Mark Taylor gave. So, yeah, that's just a bit of an aside. But yes, we've put it this way: I would have been surprised if Donald Trump hadn't been president. A lot of people were surprised when he was elected president. I would have gone the other way. I would have actually been shocked if he hadn't been the president.
Indeed, yes. Now, when I have a picture of Roosevelt, it's a painting of former President Roosevelt, and he's wearing the Grandmaster Freemasonic apron. Do you see that image?
I've got it in front of me, yes.
I have it. Now, the colors of this apron are purple and gold, and they have some other colors as well, but gold and purple are the colors for it. So then I had to ask, I wondered, well, was he given the honorary office? And I cannot prove that he was, but at this moment in time, I suspect that Donald Trump was given the honorary position. I can't prove it, but that I suspect it at the moment. Now, moving on, I have an image on the website of the apron, and it shows the colors, which are close and coincidentally they match what we see with that pin. So here's something I'm wondering about. Was it a way of Trump to celebrate it, or was it a way for him to communicate it to other Freemasons that he had been appointed? Was it a gesture? Because we just read what Albert Pike said. They purposely conceal it from all the underlings that don't deserve it. They don't deserve to know. So something was being communicated with that pin. We cannot doubt that. I don't believe the simple story that it was just used to illustrate that Corey Lewandowski is part of the Trump team. Secret Service members are trained to get familiar with faces. And in the history of the Secret Service, they know who is who. They know. They're not stupid. So that's a poor excuse. Now, as we go forward, so that's Exhibit B. Now let's go to the Grand Tamale now. Tony, you ready for this one?
Yep.
Okay, we're going to talk about Trump Tower. Trump Tower was built in 1984, and as we mentioned, you mentioned that he bought the concrete from the New York mob. It's not made out of steel. It's 664 feet high, reported. And I wonder, does he have something on the roof that's 2 feet tall, to make it 666? I don't know. But it's 664 feet high. It has 58 floors. However, now get this, Tony. This one's kind of funny. It has 58 floors, but Donald Trump added an extra 10 floors, and he removed the bottom 10 floors. So he starts at 10, and then it goes up. So he lives on... So he tells people it has 68 floors, but it really only has 58 floors. And ladies and gentlemen, this is easy to confirm. In fact, I have a link, you can click on it, and it says all this. But Donald Trump has a tendency to have his own version of reality. So he lives on his renamed floors, on floors 66, 67, and 68. He has the top 3 floors. Those belong to him. Now, as I was doing my research, I came across a photograph, and it just jumped out. I was praying, and when I'm doing my research, I do a lot of praying. I say, God, please open my eyes. Show me. Please show me. I want to really know. I want to understand. So I ask him, and the book of James says, if any man lacks wisdom, ask of God. He'll give it. So I was asking him to show me something, and as I was doing my research, I saw this image and it exploded all at once, and I saw it, and that's what I'm about to present right here. Now, as I do, I want to keep this in mind, Tony. We have covered several times, and we've established that according to the Freemasons, the Illuminati, as well as all of the New Age esoteric arts, all of those guys, all of them, their method of worship is male-female. All of it is. It's sexual, it's fertility, and all of their methods involve the earth as well as the heavens. It points down for the earth, the female portion that goes up. Now, when we look at Trump Tower, it's the most famous tower in the world, or the most famous building in the world, or at least it was for a few weeks when Trump won. You remember that, Tony? Most of the Western world, right? The crowds were there. It was excitement. They turned it into a fortress. It was a very famous building while Trump was waiting to become inaugurated. He was doing all his work from there. But the majority of the identity with Trump Tower occurs from street level. And most people only know it as that front entrance that says Trump Tower. And I have an image, an illustration that shows the front door. Most people don't look up when they look at Trump Tower, or if they have, they can't really see much because it's a very congested area of downtown New York. In fact, 2 of the sides of Trump Tower touch other buildings, so there's not a lot to see. So when I was looking at it, I came across a picture of Trump Tower from the air, and when I looked at it, Tony, I could not believe it. It changed everything. Now, before I talk about the reveal on that, I want to say something, Tony. I believe that, well, okay, I can't prove it 100%, but at this moment in time, at this point in time, I am confident. Let me say it that way. I am confident based on the evidence that Donald Trump is a secret closet worshiper of the dark arts. I believe that he participates in dark arts in secret, and his type of dark arts are not the ones that are very popular these days, but he participates in arts that have to do with going back to the gods of mythology. He participates in that. I am very confident that he does.
I'm just going to interject there for a second. I'm just looking at the picture you've got of a mantle above a fireplace, and everything there is dualism. You've got a male and a female, and you've got 2 of everything with a central, a gold something in the middle, and then either side of it, everything is concentric with a male and female and one on either end. So there's your dualism right there. So, that's just something I'm noticing as I'm looking here. So.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because we're going to touch that in a moment. But I wanted to establish, and this is going to sound crazy, I know it does, but Tony, in the end times, we're going to have the involvement of spirit entities of the underworld, of the devil. He's going to be involved in the end times. God's going to allow it for a season, meaning that they will get their chance to do their dirty work. So there are humans that worship the underworld. And I will present this, and I am very confident in this, Tony. And let me say this for the listening audience. I believe that Donald J. Trump, when he built his building in 1984, built it purposely as a temple to his gods. And during the last, what was it, 84, how many years is that? 94, 04, 14, that's 30-something years.
Yeah, 33.
Over the last
33 years, a good Masonic number.
33.
There you go.
That's, wow, Tony, thank you. That's interesting.
It is.
For the last 30, yes,
30.
For the last 33 years.
He built the Trump Tower in 84, and 33 years later he becomes the president inaugurated. There's your 33 there. And that's just hit me now. I hadn't thought of that before. So there you go.
Tony, I think you just uncovered another clue. Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what I was going to say, and I'm going to show why I believe this. But when he built it as a temple, and part of his motive, in my opinion, was to invoke the blessings and the prosperity and the favor of his deities that he worships. I am presenting this right now. I'm saying it. I know it sounds crazy, but the pieces they just make too much sense. Now, moving forward.
They do, yeah.
When we look at his penthouse, and by the way, he hasn't given an entire tour of all 3 floors. He has only shown portions. Whenever the news cameras come and the magazines show up, it's always the main floor. And maybe sometimes he'll show the office or part of a bedroom, but there's a lot that's concealed. And we don't know what goes on in there, but I have an image here, and it's right under the next one. Tony, you see it? It's of the Apollo. He has Apollo painted on his ceiling. He has the mythological deity god Apollo on his ceiling. And he also has a painting of Apollo over his mantle. And Apollo, so according to the legend, got on his chariot and he rode off. He was pulled in his chariot. And there's a narrative that goes along with Apollo. But Donald Trump painted him on the ceiling. Now, I have to ask the question, why? Was it just cool? Was it just something he was into at the time? Was it a trendy thing? Why? Everything to Donald Trump has meaning. Now, we are told that the designer who designed his penthouse modeled it after one of the previous kings, Louis XIV, I think it was. And when you look at his, Louis XIV's castle and mansion, it's all gaudy and full of gold leaf, and that's what they were going after. However, I'm going to show you some things in a moment that shows that it doesn't match. I don't believe it. So let's lay on the table right here. The god Apollo, the false god Apollo, is on Donald Trump's ceiling. He's also on his mantle. When we look at the book of Revelation, chapter 9, when the bottomless pit is opened and all of the demons come out, that are the locust demons, the scorpions, it says in chapter 11, they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name is in the Hebrew tongue Abaddon, in the Greek tongue Apollyon, which is Apollo. Apollo is that dude that's going to show up someday in the tribulation period. So let's place this on the table, ladies and gentlemen. For the people who say there's no way that Donald Trump is nefarious, well, we have things that I'm presenting. This is what we call clues, Tony. This is called a clue. So when we look at the end time narrative, Apollo's going to play a role. Now we have the leader of the free world that has Apollo painted on his ceiling. Is it for decoration, or does he actually believe in these guys? Does he actually have a relationship? Is he a part of some sort of order that acknowledges these characters? Because according to the Bible, Apollo's not fiction.
Yeah.
He's a bad dude. And he's a destroyer. Some Bible scholars say, well, that's actually Satan. So if that's another word for Satan, same thing. So the question must be asked, why does Donald Trump then have a principality on his ceiling? Okay, let's just leave that on the table. But we must ask it. And then we must also ask this. If Donald Trump is going to be the leader of the free world now and the tribulation were to start in the next few years, and then Apollo gets released, that's interesting.
Yes.
Wouldn't you say, Tony?
Absolutely.
Okay, now let's move forward. Donald Trump also has other mythological characters in his apartment, in his penthouse. He has a statue of the goddess and the god, the false ones, little g, Eros and Psyche. And then we can also see other odd statues in other portions of his house. I tried to find pictures of the penthouse and zoom in, but they're not always good. But the ones that I was able to find are painting an interesting picture. Now, let me say this, Tony. Because I prefaced at the beginning of this program with the admonition that we need to be wise, and only the wise will understand, that means that we have to consider several possibilities on the table of who the little horn's going to be. The Antichrist, the bad guy, the villain of the end-time villain. We have to place several options on the table. At the moment, the evangelical church refuses to even consider that it could be Donald Trump because they have their preset rules that it's going to be this, and this. But what if the verses don't mean that? So I am positing a theory that Donald Trump, I'm placing him on the table as a potential candidate. Tony.
Even if he's not, I agree. And even if he's not the Antichrist, he's the more I look at it, the more, well, he seems to fit the picture of being a part of the whole organization. And I just want to, something I've mentioned, I've brought it out on our Minute to Midnight show before, but, you know, a big song and dance was made about the fact that Donald Trump was 70 years, 7 months and 7 days old at his inauguration, and that must mean it's God's seal, etc., etc. And I've come back to the point and said, remember Christine Lagarde's speech in January 2014 using occult symbolism and numerology? She basically brought out a series of 70s and 7s, and if you add them up, it also comes out to 777, and that's done from an occultist, illuminist point of view. And could it even have been that she was signaling Donald Trump's inauguration as being that 777 that she was mentioning? And it may be coincidence, but that she was definitely sending a message to somebody during that speech in 2014, and people have tried to figure it out what it was. And I'm saying, well, I think there's a distinct possibility that she was signaling to the elites that are on the inside, watch the 777, which could be Donald Trump's inauguration day.
Thank you, Tony. And that's wise counsel to consider, not say adamantly it is, but also not to say adamantly it's impossible. So, because there are also other possibilities. You know, the Bible says at the last trump, and I have already seen people playing with that. I've wondered about it. It's an interesting passage. At the last trump, the trumpet will sound. So does that mean, was that God kind of giggling when he gave us that one? You guys, I'm letting you know. But if it's so, does that mean the last trump? In other words, does that mean his son, the last trump, will take over? Does that mean Barron will be the guy? Does it mean Donald Jr.? So there's several possibilities here. But I am just visiting in this quadrant the possibility of him being the villain. So that being the case, then I am pursuing, seeing if the pieces of the puzzle do fit. Now, there is a prophecy in Daniel 11:37 that says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. Talking about the little horn. When we look at Donald Trump, it's interesting that his penthouse is decorated with Greek mythology, with deities of mythology or not mythology. Why does he do that? Do normal Bible-believing Presbyterians, because that's what he supposedly is, a Presbyterian, do normal Bible-believing Presbyterians place deities on their ceiling and have their painting and no, they don't, or at least you shouldn't. So that's another thing that should be considered. Now, moving forward, let's go to the image of Trump Tower. Scroll down. I have, and ladies and gentlemen, if you can go to my website, it's there from the air. And when I saw this picture, it exploded with incredible. It was just incredible. Now, do you see it?
Yeah.
You looking at it, Tony?
Yep.
From the top to the bottom?
Yep.
Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, what we're looking at is a picture of from probably halfway up Trump Tower from another building. The camera's aimed at the middle of it, so therefore you can see the street below as well as the very top of the building. You can see the entire thing, and it shows toward the bottom of Trump Tower, there is an interesting geometric architecture, creative architecture that he included with his building, where it steps down from higher floors and it goes down 6 stories. And then he placed planters in there and he planted trees. As we're looking at this image, it's an upside down inverted triangle on the side of Trump Tower. But not only that, the thing that's really interesting, Tony, and this is what really caught my eye. I was looking at the trees and I started counting across the trees. There's six quadrants going across, 6 trees. And then if you come down the side of the triangle, it's 6. And then...
Yeah, 3 6s.
So Trump Tower has 666 in the architecture of it. But in addition to that, the step-down architecture, the way it's been designed of this triangle, goes downward and points downward, following the same sort of thinking that we see in the Masonic fertility cults in the Baal worship, where the triangle pointed down, and we read about that, how the compass and square pointed down, the female. He has the triangle pointing down into the earth. On top of that, here's another interesting thing. The way that Trump Tower was designed, instead of having a square, it's like he took a giant knife and sliced a 45, starting at the very top, and he went all the way down to the bottom, so that it's not a 90-degree angle. Instead, it's like a 45. But then he added, how do you explain that, Tony? He added small-looking quadrants so that it appears to be several buildings. And if you count them, there are 7 of them. There are 7 pillars rising above the inverted triangle. And at the top of these pillars are the pyramid shape at the top. So what we have here from this angle is the sum total of the fertility cult. We have the sum total of the square and the compass, the way they explained it, that the triangle goes down to the earth. It's the female, and the Baal portion of pillars rises. It's right here, Tony. And of course, an individual could look at this and say, Nathan, you're just pulling things out of your creative mind, your imagination. You are crazy. You're nuts. I don't believe this, but Tony, I'm showing evidence. I'm showing. We're looking at the big picture right here. Donald Trump. If my theory is true, if this is true, that this is a temple, let's just go with that for a moment. If Donald Trump built a temple 33 years ago, and he is now the president, and this building represents the phallic symbol as well as the girl's reproductive area, if it represents this, then it would also serve to be a temple of invocation. In other words, every day of the last 33 years, the temple, because of its architecture, has been offering prayers to their God. It's been fertilizing the earth with their invocation. It has been working an actual ritual in its existence. And Donald Trump, if he is part of an order, built the building so that he would be rewarded by the deities for doing this. Now, when we look at that, and then we look at the Apollo in his penthouse, we start arriving at a picture. Now, let's move. I have several images right there, by the way, but I want to show something else. And I believe this will back up my theory that Trump Tower is a temple. When you look at Masonic lodges, the interior of Masonic lodges, they will often follow similar architecture. And now, granted, there are some of them that are in lower funding municipalities or small towns. They don't have the money to have the neat decorations that New York does. But let's consider the Freemasonic lodges that have the funds. As I was searching and looking at the interiors of Freemasonic lodges, I started noticing. In fact, I was showing my son last night, and I asked him, I said, do you see anything that you can help me with? And he said, yeah. He said, Dad, look at the chandelier that's hanging in the Freemasonic Lodge of Manhattan. That would be in Trumpstown. It's a circle. And in the middle of the circle, it's like a little bulb comes out of it, and there's two of them. Okay, inside Donald Trump's penthouse, I have a picture of one of them, but he actually has two of them. Just like the Freemasonic Lodge, the chandelier looks the same.
Yeah.
And Tony, can you see that? Is that odd?
Yeah, no, it isn't. I mean, it's odd, but it's not odd if you start putting the pieces together, if you know what I'm saying.
Okay, now, below the image of the chandelier, I have it on the website. There's another picture of a Freemasonic Lodge, and it shows the pillars that the Freemasons hold in high esteem. And this is modeled after the two pillars that were outside the temple of Israel, of Solomon's temple. And God named them Boaz and Jachin, which means God will always, with God, you will always prosper. You will be able to succeed with God. Meaning without God, you won't. You'll fail. You'll be overrun. And of course, when Nebuchadnezzar showed up, he pulled them down and destroyed them. But the Freemasons worship Solomon's temple. Many of the areas and parts of Solomon's temple, they have used in their calculations of their Lucifer worship. And inside many lodges, now again, it's not every time, but it's often, and I have found it in some of the more higher funding ones. In many of the lodges, they will have the pillars together in pairs to signify Jachin and Boaz. And I have an illustration of a lodge, the interior, and it's showing the pillars together. And you brought that up, Tony. You pointed out that they were in pairs. You noticed that. When we look at Trump's apartment, and I have in my file many more pictures of his interior, and I'm going to be placing them on the website. But at least in the living room area, I'm not saying this applies to the entire apartment, but in the area where the public comes in, it is interesting that Trump, where he has pillars installed in his penthouse, they're in pairs. Over and over, they're in pairs, just like the inside of a Masonic lodge. So why is that? Let's ask that question. Why? Why does Donald Trump's penthouse seem to resemble the architecture of a Freemasonic lodge when we start looking? And by the way, I'm not even finished. There could probably be more. If some of the listeners out there have some information, send it to Tony, send it to me. We are open to that, but I'm trying to figure this thing out, Tony. So in conclusion, let's just wrap it all up. In conclusion, according to the exhibits that I have shown and the evidence that we have seen as true, we have that Trump Tower does feature the number 666 on the architecture. It's on there. It's built into it. And the edifice of Trump Tower exhibits 7 pillars that rise like a pyramid. We see that also. The 7 pillars of Baal. Also, Trump's penthouse begins on the 66th floor. Also, he has mythological deities on his ceiling. Also, he has the deities in the form of statues. His interior replicates the interior of a grand Masonic lodge. And the pillars inside his penthouse are also in pairs like we find in a Masonic lodge. So,
yes, well, there's a lot.
In my opinion, Tony, as I stated, I believe that it's a temple, and I believe that a constant invocation has been taking place to the deities that would reward him to become the leader of the free world, which has taken place 33 years later. Now, That is one thing to consider. We can place it on the table. We're at the very beginning of the narrative. A lot more events are going to happen that could give support to what I'm presenting right here. So, or they will discount it and nullify it. One of two is going to happen. But at this point in time, I'm not just going to look the other way and take the words of these prophets that say otherwise. I want to see this as evidence. I want to look at the evidence. So, Tony, the listening audience can pray about it. They can consider it. They can think about it. If Trump is a Freemason, the evidence will come out at some point, hopefully.
Yes. And it's certainly been a very good lesson for people that don't know about this stuff, I'm sure. Just following through all of this, understanding this is fascinating. I've been absolutely fascinated by this second interview here that we've just done. Part 1 was good. Part 2's been a blockbuster, I think. So thank you, Nathan. And absolutely we'll have to get you back again with more soon when you start dealing into the coat of arms and various other things. I'm sure our listeners would be keen to hear that as well.
And thank you for introducing that. I will be happy to do that. That's going to be the next installment coming in a few days. The coat of arms, as you saw, I'll just say this real briefly. He has 2 of them. One of them was created just in the last several years for his golf course in Scotland because he tried to present the one he had been using stateside, and Scotland saw it and they said it was not an authentic coat of arms. So therefore he had to design an authentic one and register it with the Scottish Heraldry Authority, which is what he did. And when he recreated it and designed it, he placed the Order out of
double-headed phoenix in it. Yep. Yeah. Order out of chaos, double-headed phoenix.
Yes. But on top of that, the first coat of arms that he had also has some Freemasonic imagery, and I'm going to talk about that when it comes out.
Sounds good. So, yes, well, thank you, Nathan. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and yes, we'll definitely have to have you back soon for that discussion on the coat of arms.
Thanks for having me.
Folks, you can find all of our A Minute to Midnight shows as well as well-written articles on aminutetomidnight.com, and Midnight is spelled MIDNITE. We do have a donation button on there because we do run this by donations, and we greatly appreciate those people that help us out that way. I write, record and play all the music that you hear in our shows, and you can find my music, royalty-free production music and sound effects at rockshoresounds.com, and there's a link to that on the A Minute to Midnight website. Well, that's about it for today. This is Tony signing off, and we will catch you in the next episode of our show.